Have you ever wanted to go help people in some far-off land? Cure the sick. Feed the hungry. Have a grand adventure. Live life on the edge. And feel really good about yourself? My name is Karin Muller. Come with me to see what that world is really like. In Northern Africa, your typical humanitarian headquarters are never in the fancy part of town. There's almost certainly no air conditioning. You just put a wet towel over your face and lie as still as you possibly can. If you're lucky, there's a fan and electricity. The toilet works with a little help. This one even has a seat. The shower doesn't work, but there are always buckets. The water's out the back. Books are worth their weight in gold. The kitchen's barely big enough to feed the dozen staff, and there's not enough dinnerware to go around. Though if the organization happens to be British, a teapot is non-negotiable. The stove runs off of gas, when you can get your hands on some. Food depends on what's available in the local market, though there's almost always garlic, onions, and potatoes. So you probably won't go hungry. If anything should break down, you either fix it or learn to do without. Safety is a huge issue. Most places park a car in front of the gate at night to stop suicide attacks. What they don't scrimp on are their vehicles. They need them to bring supplies out to the base camps that are in charge of 500,000 Sudanese refugees. Everything, from soap to cooking pots, has to be transported overland. They carry no weapons. The idea is that if they don't shoot first, the bad guys won't shoot back at them. But this makes them highly vulnerable to getting carjacked. So they travel in a convoy, according to strict United Nations rules. They're always at least 200 meters apart, so if the first vehicle gets taken, the others have time to turn around and escape. They're not supposed to stop, even if the load is loose. Rebels, bandits, even soldiers are always looking to acquire more trucks and radios. Hundreds of humanitarian vehicles are carjacked every year, despite the frequent military checkpoints and French military presence. The lead truck radios back any potential threat, no matter how innocent. The dust gets pretty bad, but once the rainy season starts, these roads will be completely impassable. If you thought the headquarters was Spartan, wait till you see what life is like out in the humanitarian field camp. This is your hut, your hairdresser. They switch places when they're done. Your shower. There's no lock, so it's good to let people know it's occupied. This one has a drain hole, though that means it's overrun with toads at night. Mirrors are hard to come by, so most guys improvise. There's one kitchen for the entire camp, though the burner's almost always out of gas. Most of the local workers prefer to use a fire pit. The ingredients are limited, and so is the cookware. And everyone eats off the same plate. If you're late to dinner, you have to make do without a spoon. Doing laundry is an endless chore. There's only one wheelbarrow, and the water's often dirtier than the clothes. At least there are plenty of thorny trees to hang your washing on. Toilet paper is non-existent, so people use plastic kettles full of water, turning the latrine into the perfect place for flies to breed. Around here, life can't survive without a source of water, and the camp is no exception. Everything depends upon the water truck. It's supposed to come every few days, unless it breaks down, the weather's bad, or it just runs out of gas. Then everyone's on strict rations until it comes around again. By midday, it's so hot that even the chickens are looking for relief. Anyone with common sense finds a shady place to sleep. Only foreigners stand out in the heat, until a dust storm rolls in. There's almost no warning, and the entire camp goes into lockdown. All sorts of animals look for refuge from the storm outside. No matter how often you sweep them out, they always find a way back in. Electricity rarely works, but it doesn't really matter. It gives you time to hang out with the other aid workers before finding a spot under a tree. It's still too hot to sleep inside. Despite everything, a lot of work gets done until the truck arrives with a long-awaited cargo. Despite all the hardship, or perhaps because of it, it doesn't take much for them to enjoy themselves.
Oh, God!
All too soon, it's time to work again. A food shipment has arrived, and it needs to be distributed. Before you can hand out bags of grain, you have to know how many people need it. It's not easy in a place where there are no phones or internet, and most refugees are illiterate. Relief agencies regularly send out teams to survey every family in the camps. Oxfam uses local props to help with simple math. They gather information about their lives before the war and what, if anything, they managed to save when they were attacked, and if any other family members have arrived over the past month. Feeding 500,000 people is no easy task, especially in a conflict zone. The roads are non-existent, and everything has to be trucked in. The UN provides the food, but the nonprofit International Relief and Development is responsible for its distribution. By U.S. law, any aid it provides must be grown in the United States. So these bags might come from as far away as Texas and take 6 months, at a price several times the local cost. Once it finally arrives, the real work begins. The food gets laid out the day before the distribution. That thin rope is all the security they need. Women make the final preparations, while the refugees wait patiently. They've been gathering since dawn. But how do you know who is getting what when almost nobody has ID and most can't even sign their names. This is where all those surveys come in. Only one member of each family signs for the distribution. If they don't know how to write, a fingerprint will do. They're then gathered in groups of 15 and let out to get their food. Contrary to the mob scenes on the evening news, everything is calm and peaceful. The IRD is well organized, and the refugees follow all the rules. By mid-morning, it's starting to look like a festival. The distribution includes cooking oil, salt, the all-important sugar for their tea, beans, a source of protein, and flour, either wheat, rye, sorghum, or a corn-soybean blend. The refugees like wheat the best. They say that barley or sorghum gives them a tummy ache. By lunchtime, they've only given away a third of the food. All of the paid workers are Chadian. None of the Sudanese are allowed to earn money while they're in the camp. This causes even more resentment between two countries who were once close friends. But today, at least, everyone can afford to be generous. It may seem like there's plenty to go around, but in fact, the monthly distribution only lasts a couple of weeks. So the kids grab whatever extra they can find. Though technically, it's against the rules. If they don't get it, someone else will. Around here, nothing goes to waste. As the day wears on, a mountain of food gradually disappears. Everyone heads back to their huts. Until next month, same time, same place, when they get to do it all over again. But grain is useless unless you have some way of cooking it. The women have to go out each day and scour the surrounding hills for wood. This land can barely support its own villages, let alone a camp of 20,000, all of whom need wood. The refugees are not supposed to chop down live trees, but when you have hungry children, the rules go out the window. Unfortunately, the local Chadian villagers need that same wood just as badly. Watching their own carefully husbanded supply disappear makes them hate the refugee camps and everybody in them. The UN has tried to solve the problem by importing wood at great expense. This load has been sitting for 3 months, and today they're finally going to hand it out. The refugees want it so badly that they'll wait all morning for a supply that only lasts a few days. The women do the heavy lifting. Men mostly supervise. That piece weighs nearly 80 pounds. And she lives over 2 miles away. But wood isn't the only thing the women have to wait in line to get. Hauling water is their most tedious and time-consuming chore. Unlike the food distribution, they can have as much of it as they want, as long as they're willing to wait, up to 3 hours per container. Pointy elbows help. The taps only work for a few hours each day, and nobody knows when they're going to run dry. This is exclusively a woman's job. If a man has neither wives nor daughters, then his female relatives will make sure he's well supplied. But the Sudanese refugees aren't the only ones who need that water. The surrounding Chadian villagers have been depending on it for several thousand years. Unfortunately, all those new wells inside the camp has caused the water table to drop by almost 15 feet. The Chadians don't understand why they should have to work so hard, while everyone in the camp is allowed to use their precious resources for free. The refugees are just as frustrated, but for a different reason. When word goes around that something is available, they always have to wait in line. Even a simple plastic sheet can take several hours and piles of paperwork. But the humanitarian agencies have very little choice. It's incredibly complicated to keep track of everything, from blankets to soap, for 500,000 people. Not to mention figuring out exactly what they need and delivering it in a timely fashion. And making sure that the refugees don't lose their ability to support themselves. Several agencies have tried to deal with this by creating work projects just outside the camp. It's also a good opportunity to improve the land. They're digging artificial ponds. Once the coming rains have filled them up, they'll be used by the surrounding villagers. Even the nomadic Arab herders will be allowed to water their animals as they pass through. The women bring plenty of drinking water and take quick breaks to check on their small children in the shade. In between, they work in teams of 4 to 8. And get paid by the cubic meter. They earn about $3 a day and work from 8 a.m. until 1 in the afternoon. Replanting trees is another popular work project. It keeps the fragile topsoil from blowing away during the frequent dust storms and will eventually provide local villagers with a needed source of wood. The men mostly watch, though they're supposed to be digging too. The women are willing to work hard because they're getting the one thing they care most about: an education for their children. School is free for anyone inside the camp. For most refugees, this is the first time they've set foot inside a Western classroom. Everything is taught in Arabic. There's even a couple of female students. The building's rough, and there's no furniture, but the teacher's very good. And these kids really want to learn. They barely even fidget. Technically, the classes run all the way through high school, though these are seniors, and they're still at a third-grade level. This is one of the few silver linings to life in the camps. When these students finally go home, their villages will never be the same. When it comes to education, the local Chadian villagers have finally taken a stand. They want their children to have access to free schooling too. So the Jewish Relief Services has stepped up to lend them a hand. They provide the raw materials. The local men donate their labor. The JRS makes sure all the workers and their families are fed. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, things rarely go as planned. They've started late, and a storm is coming. They'll be lucky if they can get one hut finished before it's too dark to work. The kids aren't sure how they feel about this new development. It looks like one good gust will blow the whole thing down, but it's surprisingly strong. The tarp will keep out the rain and dust, though it'll be stifling hot inside. But just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. This village already has 2 schoolrooms, staffed with dedicated teachers. Unfortunately, the school has fewer than 50 students, out of a village population of over 300 children. Most families are so poor that they can't afford to send their kids to school. The solution? Offer a free lunch between lessons, and every child within a 5-mile radius will be knocking at their door. 2 local women have agreed to do the cooking. Others bring wood from their own supply and water from the local well. They're making buibui, a thin gruel of corn flour and sugar, and a whole lot of water. It fills the stomach for a little while, even if the calories are negligible. The kids are so excited that there's no point in trying to teach them anything. At last, they each had to bring their own bowl. The youngest go first. They get a quick lesson in hygiene, though most aren't paying much attention. Once word gets around, this place is going to be bulging at the seams. You can usually tell how poor a village is by how many of their kids have shoes. When they finally get their meal, they make it last as long as possible. The refugee camps clearly have a profound effect on almost all the locals in the area. Khadija, for example, is Chadian and works as a cook and maid for one of the camp humanitarian organizations. She got the job because she knows how to read and write and can speak a little French. Her husband abandoned her 10 years ago, leaving her to raise their daughter entirely on her own. She eventually moved to town to give them both a better life. At first, all those modern conveniences came as quite a pleasant shock. But Khadija never lost sight of her objective, to make sure her daughter is equipped to succeed in life, even if she doesn't find a man. As far as Khadija is concerned, there's only one way that's going to happen.
You have to drag your kids to school. Even if she marries a man, then he leaves her behind, she's not going to have a hard time.
But Khadija's not entirely free of cultural expectations. A good part of her hard-earned income goes to feed her lazy older brother and his friends. He parks his motorcycle in her kitchen. She has to wrestle it outside every time she wants to cook. Despite working 7 days a week, Khadija has almost no possessions. Her tiny hut is far too hot to sit inside, and they have to haul their water from a far-off well. But to her, the only thing that matters is a future for her child. Khadija's utterly exhausted, but she's not about to go to bed. Though there's barely light enough to see, they read together, far into the night. Noura is also Chadian, but she has little else in common with Khadija. Noura abandoned her 5 children to come to the camps in a single-minded search for money and material possessions. Her goal was to find a man who would give her everything she asked for. She knows how to make the most of her remaining youth and natural beauty. It's henna. Around here, blackened feet are very appealing to men. The dye has to dry thoroughly if it's going to last. 2 months ago, Noura found her man. Muhammad was a stranger, but he had a steady income, so they got married immediately. Noura already has more possessions than most Chadians acquire in their entire lives. Noura is not a refugee. She just likes the camp because so many things are free. She could start her own business. The market's within walking distance. She makes friends easily, knows how to drive a bargain, and is surprisingly good with a cleaver. But in the end, she spends her money on yet another beauty cream and heads back home to make dinner for her husband. She may have escaped her village, but Noura's life hasn't really changed. Muhammad clearly didn't marry her for her cooking skills. She waits until he's finished, and then eats whatever is left over. Noura is circumcised and made sure her daughters were as well.
If you're not circumcised, then everyone will insult you.
Despite all her efforts,
I'm not happy. I'm not happy because I don't have money.
Noura is still waiting for the world to give her what she wants most. Al-Fadil is 32 and has been in the camp for 4 years. His wife is 17 and pregnant with his second child. Al-Fadil also helps support his mother, 2 sisters, and a variety of in-laws. Because the camp is mostly women, a lot of men take care of female relatives or marry extra wives. According to Islam, men can take up to 4 apiece. Al-Fadil makes a point of helping people whenever possible, fixing a neighbor's fence or building a new house. Once a week, he even teaches English. It's held at the Women's Center, though the class is made up exclusively of men. Al-Fadil is wonderful with his daughter and popular with the other men. And he clearly enjoys the authority and respect he gets throughout the camp. But deep down, he's extremely frustrated by his situation. He wants to go to America, even if it means leaving his family to fend for themselves. And he plans to divorce his wife as soon as she gives birth. Al-Fadil has been in a holding pattern ever since he became a refugee, whiling away his days with cards and cigarettes, dreaming of a bigger, better life, and resenting everything that keeps him here.
They do not understand us. They are going to push us because we are refugees, because we are weak.
Al-Fadil is one of the saddest consequences of the genocide, a wasted life. One day he will take his rage back to Darfur, and the violence will start all over again. Fatma is 27 and has 7 children, with an 8th one on the way. She's Chadian, the first wife of a village chief, though her youngest child was born in the camps. Because she didn't cross an international border, Fatma and her family don't get much foreign aid, even though her village was destroyed just like the Sudanese refugees. Fatma is fiercely proud of both her nationality and her Muslim faith. She almost single-handedly keeps her extended family clothed and fed. 5 times a day she sweeps the mat and lays down a rug for her husband to pray. She never complains, even when it's almost midnight and she's doing her husband's laundry by feel. That's how dark it really is. Everyone else takes advantage of the cool of night to drink a cup of tea or chat quietly or sleep. Fatma's mother is a good deal more laid back. She's done her job and is content to spend her day mixing scented wood perfumes and selling them to neighbors and friends. Though she seems more interested in visiting than making sales. Social relationships mean everything around here. It's the unmarried girls who do most of the hard work, under Fatma's watchful eye. The flour's cooked, but they still have to devein the leaves to make a sauce to dip it in. Eventually, the heat gets unbearable, and everyone finds a spot in the shade. Fatma makes a point of keeping the young women in her family segregated from the men. She makes sure their hair is covered, and they're always fully dressed, especially if they leave the compound. Punishment is quick and painful. Though apparently the rules don't apply if you're over a certain age. Inside the tent, the 2-year-old has already learned to be ashamed of her own nakedness in front of a guest. Fatma has no plans to educate her daughters, who have all been circumcised. It's Fatma's job to make sure they attract good husbands and one day have children of their own. In Fatma's family, no woman is allowed to eat until the men have had their fill. Gender always trumps age. The boys learn that when they're very young. The youngest girls eat last, long after the boys are done. Today, at least, there's plenty to go around. Fatma takes every opportunity to earn money in the camp, no matter how hard the work. Six months ago, she planted a small garden and now uses it to supplement her family needs. You can see how much she misses her home village and the chance to grow her crops. But her meager harvest isn't close to enough. She has over 20 mouths to feed. She goes to market at least twice a day and watches every penny. The innards are an enormous luxury and usually reserved for men. And cooked meat is out of the question, not even for special occasions. You barely notice that she carries a baby on her back the entire time. Unlike Nora, Fatma wants to go back to her village, even though life is easier in the camps. Fatma does not want handouts. She just wants the chance to plant her crops and tend her herds and build a better life for her family and herself. Unlike Al-Fadil, Fatma does not dream of leaving friends and family to go to a foreign land. And unlike Khadija, Fatma gets her strength from her traditional role within her extended family. Western television tends to portray all refugees as helpless victims. Fatma is nothing of the sort. She's strong and proud and incredibly resilient. She deserves a second chance. So what's stopping refugees like Fatma from returning to their villages and starting over? They are. Another war has broken out. This time it's the Chadian rebels coming from Sudan. The entire region has been at each other's throats ever since they declared independence. Not surprisingly, whole armies are permanently massed along the borders. This is one of their headquarters. Those beds are for the higher ranks. Most of the men sleep on the ground. Though even officers eat relatively simple meals. It's still better than the rank and file. They have to fend largely for themselves. It's strictly against the law to shoot footage of anything military, though apparently no one told the soldiers. They love to have their pictures taken. Military service comes with certain perks and benefits, like the chance to shoot rocket-propelled grenades and other heavy weapons. Though in reality, their lives are mostly bouts of boredom, punctuated by the occasional war. In between, they spend a lot of time swapping amulets. Each one contains a passage from the Quran that will make the wearer invisible and shield him from bullets. Toyota Land Cruisers are the vehicles of choice. They can handle very heavy loads. Some generals have even had theirs customized, though that means giving up a few very useful accessories. They're heading out on a week-long border patrol. All that bulky bedding will make useful padding on the coming 7-hour drive. It'll also cushion the grenades. You can always tell when soldiers have been in town. As if they didn't already have enough on board, they pick up a few hitchhikers, including me. I'm not particularly worried about the ride ahead until I realize that we have a high-ranking officer behind the wheel, and we're sitting on 2 55-gallon drums of gasoline, along with half a ton of assorted explosives. We're a moving bomb. All it takes is one stray bullet. Oh well, it's not like I'm walking back to town. We stop just once. The only spare is at the bottom of the load. At least it's a chance to retie turbans and share a welcome drink of water. 3 hours later, we make it to the border, which is even more primitive than the tree the headquarters was under, and full of child soldiers. For the first time in their lives, the men have to cook for themselves, haul their own water, do their own laundry, and even serve their own food. Though by now we're all so hungry that we'll eat just about anything. Once tea is served, everyone finds a tree to hang their amulets. They even build some furniture and add a few personal touches. It almost feels like home. The trees are more than just an escape from the scorching heat. They help camouflage the army's strength. You wouldn't know it, but there are several thousand men within a couple-mile radius. There's not much to do around here, except plan their next campaign. 6 a.m. Before it gets too hot, we head out on patrol. Believe it or not, that tree is the border, the source of all those wars. Nobody can tell me exactly why they hate their neighbors, only that if they set one foot across the border, they're going to blow them into a million pieces. So what happened to make these countries so unstable? For the past 1,500 years, whenever there was conflict, both parties went to see the Sultan, the traditional ruler in both Chad and Sudan. He had no legal standing in society, but he was endowed with tremendous moral authority, backed up by his knowledge of the Quran. Everyone abided by his decisions. They met in a simple hut, left their sandals in the sand, and all sat barefoot on a mat. They even shared the same drinking cup. The proceedings stopped whenever someone new arrived, for the usual elaborate greeting ritual. Everyone had a chance to say his piece. Sometimes the arguments would go on for weeks on end. The Sultan often sent off trusted elders to gather more information. He rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone shut up and listened. Then, like now, women were not allowed to present their own case. They had to sit in the back and ask a male relative to speak for them. Unfortunately, the government has replaced traditional chiefs with modern bureaucrats, and the Sultan now hears only petty land disputes and family quarrels, and quietly helps the humanitarian agencies in any way he can. I asked him why the old ways no longer worked in this part of Africa.
They don't want to accept the traditional ways because they've obtained arms.
Give a man a gun, the Sultan told me, and he will no longer sit down at the negotiating table. Give 2 men guns, and you have a war.
And that is how our society is being destroyed.
And the future?
For me, I would say that the future is somber.
But there's still one hope. The only silver lining to the refugees' terrible situation: education. The future of Sudan rests in the hands of its young women, like Jeddah. She's 17 years old and one of the best students in her class in the refugee camp. She's smart and studies hard. And crucially, her parents both believe that girls should go to school.
It's important for her to get an education. We never stopped her.
Jeddah has big plans for her future.
I want to be a teacher or a doctor.
It won't be easy. Jeddah has to get up early to do all the chores before she goes to school. The moment she gets home, it's back to work, fixing lunch for the men. Her younger brothers spend their morning hanging out, listening to music, and playing with their shades. Still, Jetta's lucky. She has her own room to study, and more clothes than most Sudanese girls her age. And most importantly, when lunch is finally ready, Jetta is allowed to sit down and eat with the men. Her mother holes up around the corner with her other children. Hopefully, Jetta's younger sister will eventually follow in her footsteps. As soon as tea is served, Jetta's off on another errand. For Jetta, those classes are more than just factual information. They're changing the way she sees the world. Jetta now wants a husband who knows how to read and write. And she has no plans to marry until she's finished with her own education. She works hard to talk her friends and neighbors into sending their girls to school as well.
If she's not learning, I say to her, please learn.
Jetta is a catalyst for change. Though she barely has time to do her chores, she just signed up for the girls' volleyball team. They even made her captain. In a culture that discourages any kind of sport for girls, just showing up at practice takes enormous courage. The men make a point of standing around and glaring silently at the players. Chris, their coach, works for one of the humanitarian organizations. When the traditional training methods fail completely, he comes up with innovative ways to teach the necessary skills.
Tell them if they have to jump the way they jump when we are dancing Masalit dances. I'm sure. No, tell them how they dance when it comes to Masalit.
But he also doesn't hesitate to make them run laps when they don't apply themselves. He even leads the way. The girls hauling water from a nearby well are totally entranced. Even the boys can't help but be impressed. Jetta's team is actually quite awful. But Chris is the only one who seems concerned. The girls are usually too busy fiddling with their scarves to worry about the ball. They just want to have a good time. But today is different. Chris has set up a match against another camp. And it's not just any game. It's his women against their men. Those guys sure look like they know what they're doing. Chris has a clear agenda.
Tell them this is my team and it has to win.
Jetta and her team care far more about including everyone than how well they play.
Let's get serious.
And the game is on. They cheer each other on no matter how bad it gets. Chris is getting more and more upset.
Tell them I want to see some seriousness, especially the girls. Tell them.
He knows his team can win, but his players aren't trying hard enough. Finally, he can't help himself. He jumps in and takes over. The girls catch his mood, and their attitudes turn sour. though they still lose in the end. The men are mostly just bewildered by what happened. Both teams quickly patch things up and go off to celebrate together. The very next day, Jeddah hears they're putting on a play and signs up for a leading role. The players talk for days before they finally agree upon a topic. Why girls should be allowed to go to school. They practice for 3 weeks, figuring out the plot and improvising lines. On opening day, a humanitarian organization donates a couple of tents. The girls are really nervous. They've never had to speak in public before, especially in front of men. They're setting up the tents in the middle of the camp. They only have to make it through the afternoon. Inside, the players are busy with costumes and makeup. But how do you attract an audience in a place with neither cell phones nor text messaging? You use one of these. They go from block to block, and like the Pied Piper, come back with several hundred children. And the play begins. Haruma, a dirt-poor farmer, doesn't want his daughter to go to school. His wife tries to talk him into it. Not a chance. His daughter, Fatma, shows up and makes a pitch herself. Haruma tells her to shut up, and she dashes off in tears. Haruma's best friend arrives next and offers some excellent advice. But Haruma just gets mad and kicks him out. Haruma's wife then goes to visit his mother, who turns out to be Jeddah. And Mom pays her son a visit. She does not pull any punches. Not that it makes much difference. And finally, Haruma's best friend returns, suddenly well-dressed. His fortunes have changed dramatically for the better. But Haruma's wife gets in the last word before she leaves. Haruma's devastated. And breaks down in tears. The kids are mesmerized. If there is going to be a change, it won't come from us. It will start right here, with the Sudanese themselves. The most extraordinary thing about the refugee camps isn't their bustling economy, or their unusual medicine, or even their colorful celebrations. It's the refugees themselves. The Quranic teacher, Abu Bakr, who teaches as much with his hands as he does with his speeches. Proud Fatma. Khadija, who would sacrifice anything to give her daughter a better life. The Sultan, peaceful and wise. Jeddah, who can bend like a clothespin, but stands straighter than any woman I've ever met. They may need our help, but they do not need our pity. In fact, there is much we can learn from them.
For information about how to use Sudan's Secret Side in the classroom, including storytelling and multimedia educational opportunities, visit SUDA'SSecretSide.org. Sudan's Secret Side, a 2-hour documentary series, is available on DVD for $24.95 plus shipping and handling. The series may also be downloaded for purchase or rental. To order online, please visit www.sudanssecretside.com. This program is brought to you in part by Take Two, turning today's youth into tomorrow's global citizens. www.taketwovideos.org